Hello, hello. It is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop, and today I have a special guest for you, Peter James of Audeze, because we're going to go deep into some ideas around headphones. Audeze, in case you don't know them, are my favorite makers of headphones. I've been using these MM500s every single day in the studio. I have a bunch of their other headphones here that we'll talk about as well. But I want to go into conceptually some of the kinds of things we can look for in headphones from any brand when it comes to mixing and mastering, what some of the issues are that we potentially run into when making critical listening decisions on headphones, and how we can make good selections that are going to suit our taste, whether that's with Audeze or any other brand. But big thanks and shout out to Audeze, because these guys were sponsors of MixCon. MixCon is still going on. We've had all of these great master classes this year, and they sponsored a master class with the great Andrew Sheps. If you haven't checked it out, you've got to. Andrew is an amazing mixer, super inspiring guy. He's worked with Adele, done beautiful records with Hozier, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Metallica, Audioslave, Green Day. His list just goes on and on. His masterclass is absolutely awesome. If you want to check it out, go over to mix-con.com. That's mix-con.com, where you can RSVP for the live premieres and live Q&As with all these great producers, as well as the kind of more product and concept focused workshops like we're doing with Peter today. One last quick shout out before we get into today's content is that we're giving away more than $10,000 worth of free gear, including some Audeze headphones. We're giving away a couple of pairs of these. So go over to mix-con.com and sign up for the mega giveaway there. We're giving away more than $10,000 worth of free gear with 3 chances to win. All right, with all that out of the way, Peter, thanks for joining us all the way from California. How are you doing today?
Oh, it's a beautiful day here in Southern California. Glad to join you, Justin.
Beautiful. All right. Well, great to have you here. A lot of people who've been following this channel know my first experience with Audeze headphones back when you were making just high-end headphones. I think your flagship models, when I first discovered you guys, were around $4,000. And I like to tell the story that when I first heard about there being $4,000 headphones at an AES trade show, I said, oh, this is going to be audiophile garbage. It's going to be magic rocks and power cords that are thicker than they need to be and all this stuff that pro audio guys sneer at. But no, I tried on your headphones and my life was changed from that point forward. I kid you not, this is like the first experience I ever had where I felt like it was almost like the experience of listening to a high-end set of mastering grade studio monitors, where you could really hear just incredible detail with the fast transient response and incredible depth of low frequency production. And the big thing that we're going to be talking about today is something that you guys have been adding on recently to your headphones. I have your newest close-back headphones here called I believe it's LCD-S20. I hope I have that right.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to ask you so I can better understand how the model names work. But this pair of headphones is remarkably cheaper than my open back MM500s, but they shocked me. I've got to say, I don't know if they perform any less well. They cost less than half as much, and they are easily my top recommendation now for close-back headphones. I was just immediately blown away. When I put them on, I was like, no, this is not what close-back headphones sound like. How? And I think a big part of that is the SLAM technology in them. And that's something that we can actually see. If I take off the magnetic ear cups on these headphones and you take a look into the actual, what's surrounding the diaphragm here, we get a sense for what the SLAM technology is. But I want you to go into some of the details there. First off, Peter, what were you guys trying to accomplish with the LCD-20s, these new headphones? And what is the SLAM technology that, in my opinion, makes them perform differently than any other closed-back headphones I've heard so far?
Well, with the LCD-S20, I'd say the goal was really to make as advanced a closed back analog headset as we can within the parameters of making a headphone that was more approachable and affordable. So we haven't done that many closed backs over the years at Audeze. Our 2 other primaries right now are the LCD XC and the LCD2 closed back, both of which kind of skew different directions sound-wise, the LCD XC being a bit more focused on the high end, and the 2 closed back being a bit more that, warm, fuzzy, audiophile, signature sound. So this was to really try and do what we've been doing with some of the recent models like the LCD 5, MM500, and MM100, and create a sound that we think really fits our target curve, which is to say, flat speakers in a well dampened room, and do that in a closed-back headphone that had the properties that folks want for being able to work in loud environments, not disturb other people, not get microphone bleed, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that you're definitely successful in it. What I noticed comparing these to the more familiar dynamic closed-back headphones that a lot of people will be used to, there is, I would say, much deeper low frequency response with much less
Mm-hmm.
of a hump in the lows. I think one of the
Yeah.
complaints conventionally with closed-back headphones is that they can sometimes feel like they actually have a lot of bass, but that bass is all concentrated more in the upper bass, and we don't really
Yeah.
get a clear vision of what's happening down at 40, 50, 60 hertz. And this leads
Yeah.
to consistent issues I hear in people's mixes. Can you give me a sense for how conventional dynamic headphones are voiced and how these are different from that voicing?
Well, I wouldn't even say it comes down to voicing so much as the way the technologies themselves work. So, dynamic headphone drivers typically are in the range of 40 to 50 millimeters. And so they tend to roll off in the bass, starting, higher than one would like you were just saying. And then putting that in a closed back enclosure, generally often with kind of a conventional bass port tends to, basically exaggerate that property. So if you look at it as the headphone, an open back dynamic headphone, something like a Sennheiser HD650, very well known, product for a long time. Once you start getting much below 60, 50 hertz, you're definitely starting to see a roll off in the bass there. You go put a close back on that, and now you have resonances to dampen whatnot, and you end up with something that sounds more like, say, another classic, well-known closed headphone, the Biodynamic DT770, which
Mm,
definitely has a big bass hump and a mid-range scoop out. And I think a lot of the folks on this live stream are probably familiar with that headphone sounds like, and probably almost picture the frequency response right in their head, that classic V
mhm,
shape. So with this LCD-S20, as you were saying, the SLAM technology, which is basically this groove that runs around the inside of where the earpad enclosure, goes on there, basically is a venting system that allows the air pressure from the area between the driver and your head to vent through this series of grooves and then outside the headphone. And the shape and size of these channels is what allows us to tune the response of the headphone. And basically, right where we might start getting a bit of roll off in the bass, this can be tuned almost like a Helmholtz resonator, if you're familiar with that term,
sure.
to kind of fill in that low end and create a smooth, flat response down to 20 hertz and beyond.
Yeah, just remarkable. That's definitely what I experienced. I can actually bring up a closer image here for you guys on screen. We bring it up a little higher so our faces aren't blocking it. I think here
Mhm.
you can kind of see it. Maybe I can zoom in a little bit further on it, but yeah, it is just this groove here with these kind of almost outlets. So it is almost like a ported headphone, which is going to be a foreign concept to a lot of people. Are you familiar with dynamic driver headphones that have done this in the past? For me, there's only been two headphones that I've experienced that have had a somewhat similar design where there was some way to like vent out the signal that allowed closed back headphones to go as deep as these, but I don't think either of them have delivered as well. And I'll tell you exactly why in a second. But would you describe this as being kind of like a port for headphones? And there are potential issues with ported speakers where they might not have the same quickness of transient
Mhm.
response in the lows. Is that potentially an issue here? And if so, how would that be mitigated?
It hasn't been an issue that we've seen in any of our testing thus far. And we've now put this product on, a couple of models. It started, of course, with our high-end electrostatic Carbon 2, which you can see behind me over my shoulder
Mhm.
there. And this LCD-S20 was the first headphone that we adapted it to on the planar magnetic side. Now, both planar and electrostatic headphone drivers share are similar in that they have a very thin, flat diaphragm, different to a weightier driver in a magnetic in a standard dynamic headphone, and because of that, they're more sensitive to pressure changes. And what we've
Mm.
discovered this SLAM technology is that by precisely venting the airflow on the essentially the side of the driver that faces you, the driver can now move more freely
Mhm.
and more accurately. So this results not just in an improvement in bass, where we tune that resonator-like effect, but also an improvement in the fine detail and spatial imaging, which we've
Mhm.
seen across every product we've put this technology on thus far.
Yeah, that
So
makes a lot of sense to me. And I guess there's a couple of factors we could mention here. One, although there is a theoretical slowing of transient response from ports, um, that's in a situation with a much more massive driver. And
exactly,
we're talking about cabinet designs that are moving much more pressure. So I could see that
yeah,
being a less of an issue in headphones when we're talking about the kinds of pressures that are here. And just two, how incredibly large the port is here compared to the volume of air being moved, which is very different than a speaker situation. But on top of that, if you're comparing a dynamic driver headphone without a port to a possibly ported um, planar magnetic headphone, the planar magnetic headphone is so much faster than the dynamic headphone that even if
exactly.
there was some issue with reducing speed of the driver, that would be mitigated just by the fact of how much lighter and faster the planar magnetic is. Now, one quick thing I want to say about planar magnetics, and one of the reasons I've switched is A, yours get so much more low frequency extension, which we've talked about. And I think the biggest reason people need headphones today is not just to double check what records will sound like on other people's headphones, but also because most people today are not mixing in well treated rooms. And unless you're going to spend thousands of dollars in acoustic treatment, getting a $400 pair of the Audeze MM100s, or I think it's a $600 pair of the LCD-20s, those could
Mhm.
actually perform better than a $1,500 speaker system in an untreated room when it comes to checking low end. So that's one thing, the low end. But two, the speed of these planar magnetic drivers make them so I can hear details without having to have an excessively bright sounding headphone. Just the speed of it allows me to hear attack and release settings on compressors, subtleties of
Mhm.
things like harmonic distortion that allow you to understand how your mix is going to translate to a variety of systems. And it is a night and day difference going from something like this to, say, the classic Sennheiser HD600s, which people have liked for mixing, not only in how much more low end extension you get, but going back to a set of Sennheiser headphones, as good as they are for dynamic headphones, those headphones sound literally compressed to me compared to
Yeah.
something with a fast transient response of this. So that really stands out to me. Does any of that make sense to you?
Oh, I mean, it makes perfect sense. Something like HD 600, HD 650. Those are really quite well tuned headphones. They have a good frequency response. But yeah, like you said, the difference between planar magnetic and dynamic technology just allows you to hear a whole lot more depth and detail in everything that you do when you're using these planar headphones. By comparison, that in some cases may have a very similar tuning. Just shows that as much as people have been fascinated by frequency response and measuring headphone frequency response lately, it doesn't tell you the whole story of what a product's going to
Mm.
sound.
And
So yeah.
yeah, and I do want to get into the frequency response a little bit with you because frequency response charts, when it comes to headphones, can be notoriously misleading. Um,
Mhm.
there's no such thing as a pair of flat headphones. And even if we did make a perfectly flat pair of headphones, they would sound awful to people. So all
Yeah.
headphones are skewed to a curve. Can you give us the quick layman's version of why no company makes flat headphones and why flat headphones would actually be bad?
Right. So, flat in the sense of a headphone that you would measure on a system does not correspond to what you would perceive as flat. So there are various different interactions between the headphone and the ear that need to be essentially measurable on a headphone measurement that deviate from what would measure as flat in order to sound right. And indeed, to many folks, that can vary a bit depending on the shape of their ear canal, head, etc. So that's what's called a head-related transfer function, or HRTF, and
Mhm.
that varies from person to person. So that's a good bit of why some people might gravitate to one type of headphone sound versus a different type of headphone sound, even if they might actually like the same speakers in the same room.
Mm. Yeah.
So that does speak to trying a variety of different headphones, or indeed trying to, personalize them with a bit of EQ to sound just right to you. And that's another place where planar magnetic headphones have a big advantage, in that because the drivers are inherently so much lower distortion, they take EQ much better. So you can EQ these
Mm.
headphones very heavily, even in the bass, although that's not where most of the frequency response variation from person to person
Right.
happens. Usually that's in the mid-range to upper frequencies. But for instance, most headphones for most folks these days are, you're wanting to see a rise around that peaks around 3 kilohertz and
Mhm.
then a drop around 8 kilohertz. Otherwise, the headphone's going to sound both kind of, muted and screechy at the same time.
Yes.
If a
Mhm.
flat headphone, for instance.
That's right. So that if I can say what you said in slightly different words, when we get flat signal coming at our ears from speakers, our ears apply gain to those that incoming
Yes.
signal, but it does it in a way that is not flat frequency wise. The pinna,
Yeah.
the outer ear, the ear canal itself, all these different parts of our ears amplify different parts of the frequency spectrum, and not just our ears, but also our shoulders and our head seem to have an effect.
Yep.
And if we don't apply that kind of EQ filtering when we take our ears out of the equation, because headphones are basically taking our ears out of the equation by playing signal right into our ear holes. So it takes out that natural 3K boost and that relative dampening of 8K. And if we don't do that, then we have headphones that, like you said, sound dull and screechy at the same time, which is not exactly the tasting notes most people are looking for in their headphones. There is a little bit of personal variation in low frequency. From what I understand, they've done a lot of studies on this, and it seems that the more that you skew towards being young and or male, the more that you might like a little bit of a low frequency lift, and maybe that comes from having broader shoulders. This is speculative here for me. And the more that you skew towards being older or female, the more that they tend to prefer more relatively bass light frequency responses. At least that's some of the studies that have come out of the fellow at Harman, whose name I'm forgetting. You might know his
Sean,
name off. Say it again.
Dr. Sean Olive. Yeah.
Yes, yes. In his, he's the guy who came up with the Harman curve, and they
Yes.
found that there is a gendered and age difference in
Mhm.
preference for low frequency and brightness in headphones, and that younger and more male listeners tend to prefer that low frequency boost, while older and more female listeners that. And my speculation about shoulder width is that apparently there's a little bit of gain in the normal head related transfer function around 100 hertz that comes when you add shoulders into a mechanism that you're testing headphones on. So that's where my speculation of the difference in low frequency stuff comes from. But I think that would have to be measured, but it seems plausible at least. There's a mechanism
Yeah,
for that.
and I think some of that also comes into that season to taste kind of
Sure.
area as well. And you think about it, and you know it makes sense that even just beyond headphones, some of those preferences tend to jive with experiences people have discussing audio with people of different sorts. And so
Mm.
that even outside of headphones, people might want some of those same properties out of their audio system.
Yep.
Yeah.
It could also make sense that people who are substantially older and
Mhm.
who are having some high frequency hearing loss can either desire or tolerate more high frequency. And that would be part of the young versus old component of it potentially as well.
Yeah. So I mean, the
Um,
Harman curve, or the Harman curves, because there's a few different ones. Yeah, are really just expressing the average of a set of preferences,
mm,
such that if you say hit the Harman curve, you might please the greatest number of people, but
mhm.
that doesn't necessarily mean that by all means it's what everybody wants. It's just
Right.
kind of the mean.
Yeah. And I also wonder, depending on how they collect the data, whether it actually hits the greatest number of people or if it's the compromise that's at the midpoint between the greatest number of tastes. And those are two slightly different ideas. But
Yeah.
we have a whole bunch of audience questions coming in, and I'd love to get to them. A lot of questions here about different Odyssey headphones and how they compare to one another, because you guys do have a few different voicing choices amongst your headphones, because
Yeah.
as well as anyone who makes headphones knows that different people have slightly different tastes because of slightly different ear shapes and all that. So I want to get
Yep.
into some of the differences between them. Right before we do, the last quick note I'd give here is that headphones that hit Harman curve to me often
Hmm.
don't translate well to mixing. To me, Harman curve it's great for finding something I think to suit consumers. But to me, Harman Kardon headphones often feel a little over scooped and a little bit over boosted somewhere in the lower upper mid range that
Mhm.
makes them, I think, flattering in a way that may be one of the reasons people select them more, is that they're not actually in determining Harman curve. The goal is put people in a reasonably flat room with good speakers and then ask them which ones sound the most like the speakers. But they're doing that with people who aren't necessarily critical listeners. They're not just like mastering engineers like me. And when I actually listen to a set of Harman Curve headphones next to my speakers, they almost always sound more light in the extreme lows with a ramp up in the upper bass and a little bit of an extra edge in the upper mid range, which does sound exciting and flattering, but it does not sound more like my high end mastering speakers. And if I want
Mhm.
something flatter, I'm always grabbing for something like this. And I think the small number of people who aren't big fans of Audeze headphones are often people who have become addicted to the Harman curve, and they've come to determine that Harman curve is normal and anything that skews from it is abnormal and wrong. But if you ask me, no, the gold standard is what do speakers sound like in a room. Harman curve does not emulate that exactly, in my opinion. And then
Mhm.
the closer we get to Harman curve, the more we're potentially getting away from the most neutral curve that would be most useful for people mixing and mastering. And that's why I think my preferred headphones always skew a little bit from Harman, as I believe yours do. Do you think there's any sense to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely sense to that. Like you said, our headphones by and large are not tuned to strictly follow the Harman curve, and in some respects, over time, some of our headphones have leaned more towards compliance in certain respects, such as the 3 kilohertz bump. Which, if you go
Mm-hmm.
back to the early days of Odyssey with products like the LCD-2, LCD-3, there'd be either a dip or kind of a flatness at that point. Whereas later models like LCD5, MM500 have started to fill out that ear gain region
Yeah.
in a way that's more like Harman. But I think the differences that you're citing there are more on the low end, where
Mm-hmm.
yeah, a product like MM500 or LCD5 definitely does not have that Harman rise in the mid bass, and we tend to keep the bass fairly flat through those headphones, down to in some cases 20 hertz. And then on the high end, ours have tended to lean a bit more subdued than that Harman curve. So that's pretty much kind of exactly what you're hitting there on those differences. And like anything, flavor to taste. Some folks will say that the MM500 is too light on the highs. For instance, is probably the most common complaint, I guess you could say, I've heard about that headphone. But on the other hand, there's an awful lot of folks who like it a lot and think it hits kind of exactly where they're looking for. And that's kind of the thing about headphones. There's not necessarily one frequency response to rule them all for all
Yes.
people and all purposes. But
Well,
currently at Audeze, we think products that we're voicing similar to MM500, things like Carbon 2, are about as close to that as you can get for our preferences and tastes.
yeah, no, and I think you guys have done a great job in it. Now, to speak a little bit more specifically to some of these differences, maybe we can go over to your website and just go through some of the product line that's really
Sure.
designed for studio users. And maybe you can
Mhm.
give us a sense for why have so many models and how do they compare to one another? So,
Sure.
breaking it down really quick, I'm just going to give people a quick overview and I want to ask you for more details on each of them. We see up
Yep.
here the newest one, the LCD-S20, which is a closed back. And then there's all these headphones with an X in them. For instance, LCD-X, LCD-MX4, which interestingly are the ones that are used by uh, Andrew Sheps, who is recently on,
Yep.
LCD-XC, which is the X series closed back headphones, and then we're looking at the MM series, the MM500s, which I have here, and the MM100s. And I believe the voicing on these is kind of similar to your super high end LCD4 and LCD5 headphones, which I'm a big fan of, although I know there's some differences there as well. Is
Mhm.
it useful for me to think of there being two overall families of sonic character when it comes to Odyssey headphones, or how would you best explain
Uh,
why the choice in models?
I'd say if anything, I'd almost say there's three in a
Okay.
sense. The first main Odyssey product was the LCD-2, which is,
Mhm.
we still make on the audiophile side. That headphone had a number of evolutions over its first couple of years, and the LCD-3 came out kind of shortly thereafter. The next big release for Odyssey was the LCD-X. Now, the 2,
Mm.
the 3, and the X all feature basically different magnet arrays and configurations and different driver trace patterns to work with those magnet arrays. So that was basically the early evolution of basically Odyssey driver technology. Because when we first started, we hadn't yet developed fluxor magnets, phaser waveguides, uniforce diaphragms. These are all things that kind of came along as we were developing these different products. Those first 2 models, LCD-2, LCD-3, and then finally the LCD-4 in that audiophile line, all, like I said, featured, if anything, a dip in that mid-range around 2
Mhm.
to 3 kilohertz. And because of that, a lot of audiophiles took to it in the sense that they felt like these headphones had amazing bass. Well, they did
Mm.
have amazing bass. It was flat to 20 hertz in many cases, but because that ear gain wasn't quite so high, people felt like the low end was a more prominent part of the overall sound they were hearing,
Yeah.
and really gave Odyssey headphones the tick for bass. Well, the LCD X was the first product in the Odyssey line that came out and started to fill out that mid range better, and
Mhm.
then we started to feel like, okay, this is a sound that you could better use for mixing, mastering, professional uses, that it had a more true to life frequency response. And
Mhm.
so that sound developed for a while in products like XC, MX4, which introduced a more powerful magnetic array. In fact, the most powerful magnetic array we've ever put on a pair of headphones. And then when we developed LCD5, that was the first product that changed from a dual-sided magnetic array to a single-sided magnetic array,
Hmm.
which required a lot of changes to the driver diaphragm. This was done in order to decrease the weight of the headphones, because
Yes.
some folks do find some of these headphones a bit on the heavy side.
Mhm.
And then since the LCD5, in products like MM100, MM500, we've continued on with that single-sided magnetic array. And
Mhm.
that's resulted in all 3 of these families of headphones having a bit of a different sound, and I'd characterize it by how much mid-range energy there is in the sound. So basically,
Mm.
that LCD-2, 3, 4 has a little bit of a dip in the mid-range. The
Mhm.
LCD X series is a little flatter through the mid-range, and now the LCD-5 and the MM series, along with Maxwell, which is a digital headphone that's a
Mhm.
little bit of a different story, all have more of that Harman-like ear gain in the mid range. So
Right.
that's how I would primarily break down our headphones into kind of 3 different groups.
That makes a lot of sense. So let me see if I can repeat some of this back to you and see if it makes sense. I mean, the first ones that I experienced when you're really starting to come to some of the pro audio trade shows were the original LCD-4s, which I was
Mhm,
amazed by low frequencies on these, as so many others were. And they
mhm.
weren't like big in the lows and the way that like an overly amped up V-shaped headphone are. What they did is they extended deep into the lows, and there was enough pressure there that you could really feel the low end as well as hear it. And it was a much more speaker-like experience, I feel like, than the average headphones that were out there. The next ones I really got to know after that were your next release, the LCD-5s, which got a little bit smaller and a little bit lighter in weight. And they had maybe just ever so slightly less of that sense of like extreme feeling of the depth of lows, and maybe started to skew towards ever so slightly tighter sounding, although, subtle difference. Really nice as well. I like both of them a lot. And then I tried out the MM500s when they came out. And these ones, I did feel that slightly kind of brighter, like lifting up the upper mid range a little bit compared to the LCD-4s and LCD-5s. And the way that I've described it is the LCD-4s, I mean, I think they still cost about $4,000, but if I would give those a 100 score out of maximum 100, like those are probably still my favorites that I've tried. I'd give them like 100. For my and this is just personal taste. Someone else's taste might rank order these completely differently. This is not a quality assessment, but like a um, how much they would be the headphones I would grab if you said Justin, you can have any Odyssey headphones for free. Pick one off the shelf. My rank ordering among the planners would be probably the LCD4s at like 100 out of 100. The LCD5s is like a 98 out of 100. And then the MM500s as like a 96 out of 100. Like, I feel like my favorites are only 1% or 2% more my favorites than the next my second most favorites, and then my third most favorites are maybe 1 or 2% less my favorites than the one above them. They're all so close. But I do hear that difference with the LCD4s having the greatest depth and feeling of lows, with the MM500s out of those three having a little bit less of that and a little bit more of that brightness. Now, the LCD-X, you're saying they have relative to the MM500s, maybe a little bit less of the upper mid-range boost. Do I have that right? How do we compare the X series from the to the MM500s? Could you describe that one more time for us?
Right. So the X series, both the LCD-X and the XC, and even the MX4, don't have as much of that 2 to 3 kilohertz ear gain as that you hear on the LCD5, MM500, MM100. They also tend to have a little bit more treble energy as well compared to those three newer headphones. So some folks find, particularly for spatial audio work, they really enjoy that little additional amount of treble energy around the like 8 to 10K region that you get on the X models. The MX4 with its very powerful drive magnetic array is also our most efficient headphone, so it gets the loudest out of the quietest sources. And that is one advantage, I guess you'd say, of the X series, is that because they still have that dual-sided magnet array with a particular type of voice coil arrangement, they're the most efficient of these headphones. So they get the loudest out of the same signal, whereas the single side magnet array on the newer headphones generally requires a little bit more power.
Gotcha. All right. That makes a lot of sense to me. So which headphones are brighter is often the question that people will ask. And I feel like that's a hard question to answer because, like you said, the X series are brighter in the sense that they have more of the extreme high frequencies, the true high highs, the stuff from 8, 10K on up. But the MM500s have a little bit more of that, 3-ish K to 4-ish K area, which to some people, they would say that is bright. So what is bright to you? Is upper mid-range bright or is treble bright? And it's hard to say, sometimes, and it depends on the age of the listener as well. I mean, I've had some clients in mastering who are in their 60s and beyond, and what they think sounds bright is an increase in the upper mid-range, because when there's an increase in the high treble, they can't hear it. And sometimes sounds that sound brighter to me, like, oh, that's way brighter. Could you make that less bright? Can we take down a bunch of 10K? That will make no difference to them, or very minimal difference. Whereas to me, it makes a very large difference in my perception of brightness. So that's a tricky thing where bright is such a catch-all term. It could speak to anything from 2K up to 20K. What do you mean by bright? So
yeah, and that's just a classic issue in audio of trying to use these words to describe things that are these words that are just not nearly precise enough. Warm, that's another one that just gets folks in trouble all the time. What makes something sound warm and why to one person versus the other? You can get drastically different responses. Pin those down
to some people, warm seems to mean darker, and to some people, warm seems to mean more scooped, and to some people, warm seems to mean brighter. I think warm just means more in the direction of what I think would sound better. And that's
that's a good one, because oftentimes to some folks, warm can just mean more second order harmonic distortion.
Sure.
Which now we're getting away from frequency response entirely.
Yeah. No, great point. All right, I want to turn it over to some audience questions and see what these guys have for us. We've been going here for almost a half an hour now, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. You've been super generous with it, and we want to keep this one somewhat short and concise. But let's go through it here. Phase Station writes in to say, hey, Justin, Audeze LCD-X user here with the big smiley face. Binary Feedback says, I tried the S20 at Can Jam London. I enjoyed them very much. Didn't feel as precise and resolving as an X. Not sure exactly what that means, but still well-defined with great sub-extension and a smooth, round mid-range. Kerko says, LCD-X user here. What's the difference between the S20 and the LCD-X, especially for bass-heavy music? Well, I think one of the biggest differences is that the S20 is going to be a closed back and the LCD-X is going to be an open back. But maybe the more direct comparison would be between the LCD S20 and the LCD XC. Would be that be the better basis of comparison, do you think?
Well, I mean, it's a better base of comparison in that they're functionally similar.
Sure.
And in that respect, yeah, the XC has quite a bit more treble energy. So, if you have the headphones, basically set to the same volume at, like, let's say 1 kilohertz, yeah, you're going to be getting a lot more from like 5K up on that XC,
Mhm.
which would make it, as they noted about the LCDX, sound, quite a bit more resolving in that
Mhm.
sense. You're just focusing more of your attention on that region. Regarding that comment about focusing more focused or resolving on the X versus the S20, I'd say that's probably mostly just down to the fact that the X does have that like 8 to 10K bump that draws out some of those details for folks.
Mm.
I don't think there's anything inherently unresolving about the performance or the presentation of the S20. I think it's just really a question of frequency response there to a large extent. But in terms of just summing up LCDX versus S20, yeah, that's a little bit of a hard job given open versus closed. But I would say yeah, the X is going to lean towards a presentation that is a bit more expansive and open sounding. Again, largely due to that bit of that treble bump. And the S20 is going to be a little more focused and perhaps give you a little more basically focus on the low end presentation. So if you're looking to really focus in on that, it would probably be a good headphone for you.
Gotcha. So is it fair to say that the LCD XC, they're voiced more like everything else with an X on them, which means a little bit more of the true high frequencies, the 5K and above stuff, whereas the LCD S20 is maybe voiced a little closer to something like the MM500 and the MM100 with slightly more of the upper mid-range bias rather than the extreme high frequency bias?
Yeah, and if you compare the S20 with the 100, the 500, that 3K peak isn't quite as high on the
Mm.
S20. Whereas with the XC compared to the XC is definitely more prominent in the high end even than the original X. And I think
Gotcha.
that's some of it to do with the enclosure and dampening and the way that product sort of came together there.
Right. Yeah. So for the person here who is asking, um, LCDX user here, what's the difference between the S20 and the LCDX, especially for bass heavy music? It seems to me like someone who's into bass heavy EDM, they might be slightly more interested in the S20 sound, whereas maybe someone who listens to more natural or acoustic or immersive music might be more interested in the LCDX sound. But with that said, there's going to be so much crossover depending on personal tastes.
Exactly. And so what someone might react to in that
Mhm.
situation is they might listen to the X, and because that ear gain region isn't quite as hot, they might turn the turn the product up, listen to it at a higher volume and think it has more bass or more involving bass or
Mhm.
bass with more focus or details. But if you match the volume in bass on the two headphones, I think you'd probably find them more comparable than you might think.
Right. Ah, interesting. All right, a couple of similar questions here. Phase Station writes to say, question: as a proud LCD-X owner, what additional value or sonic advantages would the LCD S20 bring to my setup? And Sheejland says, same thing here, LCD-X user. I have the same question with a focus on classical music. So I'm going to take a
Mhm.
quick stab at this. If you already own the
Okay.
CDX, what additional advantage or sonic benefit would the LCD S20 have? Well, the clear advantage is closed back versus open back. When you're on a set of S20s, you're on a closed back set of headphones. You're on an open back set of headphones with other things. And the big difference with the closed back headphones is just number one, how much sound comes in, and number two, how much sound comes out, which is sometimes just as important. If you're mixing in a compromised environment and you don't want to annoy everyone around you, closed backs are of great benefit there. And usually you've had to have an extreme detriment to performance when you go from open back to close back when it comes to frequency response, transient response, low frequency extension and evenness and all of that. But now with something like the LCD S20 and arguably with the LCD XC, having a
Mhm.
planar magnetic closed headphone, especially with the SLAM technology that's here in the LCD 20, that you can make great judgments about deep low frequencies on closed back headphones. And you're not going to be able to do that on most closed back headphones. And don't have the benefits of closed back headphones if you're on the LCD XC. The other possible advantage is that you're going to be comparing more directly, I think, the two major different voicings in the Odyssey family, because the LCD-X steers more towards that accent on the high frequencies, where the LCD S20 steers more towards the accent on the upper mid range. And by having the two, you can just find which ones you gravitate more towards. And then ultimately, you probably want to figure out which shape leads you to better mixes that translate to more places, and just stick with that one side of the family. What do you think of that, Peter? Is there anything you'd add or change or alter in that recommendation?
Well, I mean, I'd say, generally you nailed it. The big advantage there is just simply the reality of having a closed back headphone that still maintains really high performance. If you're using an LCDX and you're happy with it, I wouldn't say you need to rush out and buy an S20 if you don't need a closed back headphone. Now that in mind, your second point about the difference in the frequency response or the kind of headphone family that they fall into, I'd say it's true. Although I'd say the X is the closer to neutral, perhaps, of its sibling, the XD, and then the S20 has less of a strong ear gain compared to MM100 and 500. So it's not the greatest difference contrast wise between those two product families. Um,
Mhm.
and your point about maybe finding one headphone that you really like and sticking with it. I guess the other angle I'd come from with that is, a lot of people don't necessarily mix on or check things on one set of speakers, and headphones could definitely be the same way if you wanted to consider different perspectives from different models. And of course, headphones have the benefit of they're fairly small and light, and you just pop on a different pair and hear a different inflection on it. So yeah, that's kind of what I'd have to say there.
Fair enough. And then another quick question would be the LCD S20s compared to the LCD XCs. The new
Yeah.
20s, these have that slam technology and that kind of venting in there. Do the LCD XCs have that? And are they, does one perform potentially better in the low frequencies than the other?
I would say, again, because of the difference in basically voicing of the two products,
Mhm.
someone who would just pop on the two headphones and give them a quick listen would probably say the S20 was more present in the bass. But I think that's really down again to the balance of them. If you played the same volume of bass through both of them, I think you'd see excellent bass performance from both of them for different reasons. The XC has a more powerful magnetic array and a larger driver, which are advantages. But on the other hand, those make the headphone bigger, heavier, and more expensive. So,
Yeah.
there's no free lunch there. And essentially, in that respect, the SLAM system helps the LCD S20 elevate its performance, even though it has that smaller, lighter, less expensive to produce driver.
Gotcha. So part of it is that the SLAM technology allows you to get a similar level of performance that you already have in the LCD XC in a smaller, lighter, less expensive headphone than you otherwise could. And there is a difference in price there. I believe that at least the introductory price right now in the LCD S20 is about $500, and the LCD
Yep.
XC is considerably more. Are they more like $700 or $800? What's the differential there?
No, the XC is actually about 1,300.
1,300, so substantially, so more than double. So
Mhm.
so in the LCD XC, which is going to have similar quality of low frequency performance with a different voicing, to get that costs more than double without the SLAM technology. Once you add in the SLAM technology, we can cut prices by more than half with some ingenious engineering. That makes a lot of sense to me, and
And
that helps make.
there's
Yeah,
more to it than just the slam tech on that,
sure.
of course, too. The S20 here, we did engineer it to be, a more affordable closed back headphone. Some of that is, manufacturing. So that's using parts like this headband structure that we produce in mass for our Maxwell gaming headset on this product helps save cost here, as well as again streamlining the way that some of these other parts are made. And again, we're conscious of the fact that one of the main criticisms of some of the older Audeze headphones has been weight and comfort as a result of weight. So this S20 weighs, I believe, about 100 grams less, or 20% less than an LCD XC, which can make for quite a difference over the long term as far as comfort goes as well.
Yeah, that's substantial. All right. Couple more questions here, and some questions here on EQ that I think will be very interesting. Martin Blackman says, LCD-X user here, would your guidance be to not use a corrective EQ like Harman? And right after that, Breeziamar says, question, what are the downsides of using parametric EQ to make one headphone match the frequency response of another rather than buying a whole new headphone? So do you have thoughts there on whether or not you'd recommend EQ correction for either of these and the potential pros and cons of that approach?
Well, our headphones, like we covered a little bit earlier, take EQ really well due to the low distortion, linear response of the driver. And that's actually something that we leverage in a product like our Maxwell gaming headset, which is a digital headphone. So it has, built-in digital EQ to hit the, target curve that we want for that headphone, despite having to have batteries and other parts inside the ear cup that we don't have on, these analog headphones. So we, essentially in that way, believe that the headphones are made in a way that they are made to be EQ'd well. Now, what are potential downsides? Well, like you got at, distortion could be a problem in, potentially other headphones, other designs, or even our headphones if you push that EQ to absurd extremes, particularly as far as playing at extremely high volumes with a lot of bass boost, that kind of thing. You could eventually tap out the ability of the driver to produce that distortionless sound, and that is one place where our headphones with larger drivers do have an advantage. So that would be an advantage of an XC over an S20, for instance, is that larger driver gives you a higher max SPL. And would give you more overhead for potential EQ, that sort of thing. Now, otherwise, if you want to take the headphone and shape the sound of it to sound like another headphone, to sound like a speaker, or to just fit your own personal, target curve a little better, I would say, it's advisable. It's a totally reasonable thing to do, and these headphones support it quite well. Let's see. There was another part of that question, though, that I think I'm spacing on now.
I think you got most of it there. One was asking, would your guidance be to not use a corrective EQ? And then the other person was asking about potential disadvantages to using EQ. Okay. I think you answered that fairly well. All right, our next one's here. Randy says, good afternoon, gentlemen. Good afternoon, Randy. We're going to have to start wrapping it up soon because we're getting close to an hour here. It's amazing. Whenever I talk to Peter, it's the same way when I visit him at a trade show. I talk to him for about an hour about headphones, and I never expected to take that long, but it just never stops being interesting. So thank you so much for taking the time to go this deep with us.
No problem. Feedback. When you've been kind of a headphone nerd, a professional headphone nerd, like I refer to myself as for, going on 25 years now, it's just, that's just what happens. You have a lot of things to say about headphones.
Dig it, as you very well should. If you could get tired talking about headphones, you'd be in the wrong line of work here. Binary Feedback says, okay, regarding resolving X and up, they show depth and imaging better. In my opinion, I don't think it's just a function of frequency response, because the 4Z I find are even more resolving than the X. All Audeze are resolving, even Maxwell. This is the first time I've heard the word resolving. I guess it's something that's floating around in the hi-fi community. I'm not used to hearing it in the pro audio community. What do people mean when they say resolving? Is it something that just means warm, or is it he's saying it doesn't just mean frequency response? What do people mean when they say that, do you think?
Generally, people are using this as kind of a stand-in for detail.
Mhm.
But some folks can mean something more than detail. It's more like having a really high sense of what is on a particular recording, to the extent that it is more resolving to the original event that was
Hmm.
recorded. So kind of a measure of faithfulness or fidelity in that particular response. So usually that's a combination of having accurate frequency response to one's taste, and tracking that signal really accurately and reproducing all the nuances. In that respect, this person nails it, in the sense that LCD4Z, like LCD5, like LCD4 before it, uses our thinnest diaphragm material that we have in any of our planar headphones. So in that respect, it's a lighter membrane that can move more quickly and track more tiny changes in volume level to theoretically better represent the the input signal.
Mhm.
So that's definitely true that those are the most elite headphones we have in that respect, other than, of course, the carbon electrostatic, which, being that it has absolutely no metal on the driver due to the use of carbon nanotube technology, that headphone should be the most resolving headphone that we make, and we certainly think it is.
Gotcha. Interesting. I'm going to withhold judgment on the use of the term and how mixed up it may or may not sound to me, but I will. I will not go into great depth of that right now, because I'll spark a war between pro audio nerds and audiophile nerds, I think, on some of our differences in language. My general wish is something that is probably unreasonable to wish for, is that everyone could learn to hear the frequency spectrum in at least 7 different bands, and then communicate specifically about those bands, so we'd know what we're talking about when we're talking about frequency. And then secondarily, if they could learn to hear the difference between distortion, lack of distortion, and then different orders of distortion, and then possibly if they could learn to hear basically speed of transient, either flattening of transient versus non-flattening of transient, and also maybe the idea of resonance, which would be a little bit like the hang of. So the other end of the speed of a driver is how quickly it can kind of recover. And when I say quickly, I'm not talking about a frequency. It's like, how far can the driver travel in the time allotted? So that's what transient response means to me. Sometimes I talk about a driver being fast, and people say, what do you mean fast? That just means it can do a higher frequency. It's like, no, there's two different aspects to speed. One is how fast can it move back and forth within a given time? The other is how far can it move in that given cycle? So both of those are aspects of speed, but this is probably unreasonable to ask people to all understand before they talk about things, because all of that took me at least 10 to 15 years to learn to hear,
Right.
So I was like a
Right.
professional in audio for probably a decade before I could articulate any of that and be able to, in blind tests, distinguish those things. And it's unreasonable for me to say, hey, you're not allowed to talk about audio until you can do all that, because people can't. So we're going to always use words that mix a bunch of things together, because they're mixed together in our heads, because we can't separate them because we don't have the skills. That's number one. And number two, they are kind of mixed together physically. So
Oh yeah.
harmonic distortion and transient response are interrelated, to the degree that if you theoretically could reproduce a given frequency perfectly with no distortion, it would also have a perfect transient response. So they're in a way interrelated. So yeah, stuff is complicated, so I shouldn't be a snob about what language people use, and keep on talking about audio stuff, and we'll just keep on trying to understand each other, as difficult as that may be. And sometimes the best thing to do is just play records for each other, and we can talk with music instead of with our mouths.
Absolutely. Sit down, listen to it, and figure it out is often the best way forward. And that's one of the great things about headphones. You can just rock up with a few pairs of headphones, and sit down, do some listening, make some comparisons, draw some conclusions in a way that's just inherently, ironically, a bit more social than speakers. Because you have to bring the people to the speakers. You can bring the headphones to the people.
Yes. All right. Braxel says, so many headphones I want to mix. Which set should I get? I'm going to say, what's your budget? And if your budget is as cheap as possible, I'm going to say the MM100s, because they are only $400, and I have no question that you can make great mixing decisions on those. I would only steer you towards the S20s over them if you needed a set of closed back headphones, because I think the performance between the MM100s and the S20s and the voicing are so close that I don't think you necessarily need to spend a couple $100 more to get a superior voicing or superior quality out of the LCD-S20s. You'd spend $100 more, or maybe more than that once they're no longer on intro pricing. You'd spend a little bit more for the LCD S20s because you need a closed back headphone without losing any of that performance that you already get in the MM100s. And then if you have a little bit more to spend, I really like the MM500s, but you may slightly prefer the LCD-Xs. So I would compare those two. They're in similar price ranges. And if you like a little bit more accenting of the extreme highs, go towards the LCD-X. If you like a little bit less accenting of the high highs and skewing a little bit more towards the forward mid-range, then I'd go towards the MM500. And then if you have more than $1,500 or $2,000 to spend, then it's like, man, try all of the nicest things. You're officially in the club of headphone nerds. You're looking at $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 headphones. Just try them all, and then. But if you just want to mix, just get the MM500s. And if you just want to mix, but you need sound not to get in and out, get the LCD-20s. And then if you have more to spend, MM500 or LCD-X. And then if you have more to spend than that, man, start flying yourself out of trade shows and like listen to all the headphones, because apparently you have money to burn. So do it.
Yeah. Nothing to add there.
All right.
Nailed it.
I only can say all this stuff because I've had so many conversations with Peter to be able to understand the differences between the headphones. All right, last question or two before we let you go here. If not asked already, how do these compare to the Bear Dynamic DT770? The 770 are relatively scooped sounding dynamic headphones. They're some of the best scooped sounding dynamic headphones out there. I think they're so much fun. I have a pair right here, the 770s, such great comfort for their extremely low price, very inexpensive. They cost a fraction of the least expensive Audeces, but different beast when it comes to performance. They have nowhere near the transient response, nowhere near the low frequency extension. This, in my opinion, and in Bear Dynamics' opinion, is not a mixing headphone. You would be getting the Bear Dynamic 990 or 1990 for a flatter voiced mixing headphone. But then again, the Audeces are going to be a little bit more expensive, but going to have much more low frequency extension, much faster transient response. But if you want to spend a little bit less or you want a lighter headphone, Bear Dynamic are a great way to go, but totally different category of product. And if you have a little bit more to spend, I think my general recommendation for just not sacrificing quality would be go to the MM500s over the Bear Dynamics. But if you have a little less to spend or you can't support as much weight on your head for some reason, then maybe you'd like the Bears. That's my opinion. I don't know how comfortable Peter feels speaking directly about other brands, but those are my 2 cents.
Well, I'll just say that the DT770 was one of the, I think it was actually the first like serious closed-back headphone I bought back, 20 plus years ago. I had a Sennheiser HD600 and I had a DT770. So yeah, very, very familiar with those headphones. They're kind of fun frequency response. I think you described the differences, pretty accurately there.
Cool. Casper says he loves his LCD-X and he boosts the low end and that he really loves him that way. Another one here, Martin says, so it is possible to EQ the LCD-X to sound like the MM500s. I would think theoretically that should be possible. I don't know if there's any company that has such curves currently available, but in theory, why not?
So we have a plugin that we call Reveal Plus. That it doesn't do exactly that, but it does bring. It does have a curve for each headphone that basically brings each headphone towards a neutral target, such that let's say you were in one place using an MM500 and you were in another place using an LCD-X. Those two people could basically be kind of speaking the same language with what they're hearing on those headphones.
I think you should add this as a feature to the plugin because it's there theoretically in there. If you have the source curve of each and the target curve of each, you should be able to go from one to the other, and it might be fun for some users to demo.
Yeah, we're looking at doing some interesting stuff potentially coming up in the software realm. So it's been a little quiet on that front for us lately, but we've got some stuff in development. But yeah, it would totally be possible to EQ one to sound like the other. I know for my own personal preference, the LCD-X is generally a headphone that I want to EQ for my purposes. I want to fill out that ear gain region a little bit. I want to bring down that treble peak a little bit, and essentially in doing so, I make it sound more like an MM500. That's just kind of what I gravitate to. So yeah, it's a valid thing to do for sure.
Sure, fair enough. All right, and there's going to be some people who would prefer exact opposite. Is there anything I can do to EQ my M500 to sound more like the LCD-X? All right, and this will be the last question. I think this is a very useful one in the context of what we're talking about today. Randy Whitted says, is there any great benefit received from using open back headphones instead of closed back headphones? And I would say that in theory, generally, yes, that open back headphones should have superior performance as far as frequency response and lack of resonance. But with this SLAM technology, and even with some of the stuff you're able to do in some of your closed backs that don't have the SLAM technology, it's hard for me to say. What are the theoretical benefits of open back headphones, and how can a pair of closed back headphones mitigate against them? Because, like I said, comparing these these to the similarly priced MM100s, I can't say that the MM100s are better because they're open back. These sure cost maybe $100 more, but they're just as good in every way, which is not what I'm used to from closed back headphones.
Yeah, and like you say, it's not what you're used to because putting that closed back enclosure really does make it a much more difficult engineering prospect to deliver the same sound quality, because now you've got all of this wall of sound being reflected back, creating time and distortion issues, potentially resonance issues, and while I'm pleased that you enjoy the LCD-S20 so much, and so do I. As great sounding as a headphone as it is, I still think ultimately, it's certainly easier to make a closed back headphone, an open back headphone rather, sound really, really good. And you can see that in the reality that most of the headphones we sell are open back. And it's not to say it's not worth trying to push the envelope of what you can do in a closed back headphone, and I'd like to think we're doing that with products like the S20. But the simplicity of an open back design in that sense is just always going to offer sonic advantages. And maybe through further R&D, material science development, we can continue to minimize those differences as much as possible. But I think it's just one of those things that I don't know that you could ever say that theoretically you could ever make closed back headphones sound better, just as good, without any disadvantage compared to a similarly constructed open back product.
Right. Well, that's the big caveat, is these similarly constructed or plausibly similarly priced, because there are great dynamic open back headphones that probably are not as good as your closed back headphones. So there's one design consideration. Hey, put a planar magnetic driver in there and then, put in a vent, and a closed back headphone can perform better than an open back headphone, except your closed back headphone, we're talking about something that is, $600 on its introductory price, whereas the nice open back headphones that they're outperforming, maybe they're $300. So sometimes if you throw enough money and ingenuity at a problem, then the challenges go away. But I think I understand what you're getting at, which is that all else being equal, it's more of a design challenge and a material challenge, and therefore a cost challenge to make closed back headphones perform as well as open back headphones. It is possible to make a pair of closed back headphones that perform as well or even better than another specific pair of open back headphones. But they're not going to be the same price, and they're not going to have the same simplicity versus complexity of design.
Yeah.
So does some of that make sense?
A comparison I might make would be the difference between, say, something like a NASCAR car and a Formula One car. Once you're freed from those restrictions of having a body that covers the wheels and all those sort of things, they're able to do a lot of different things that make open wheel race cars perform a lot better. And that's kind of ironically similar to open back headphones in that respect. Once you put
Hmm.
those constraints on the engineering, it's gonna take more, whether that's money, engineering, time, or just performance compromise to get to the same goal there.
Yes. So all else being equal, an open-wheeled car, it can perform better than a closed-wheel car. However, that
Mhm.
does not mean that an open-wheeled go-kart is going to perform better than a Dodge Charger or, and vice versa
Yeah,
and all that stuff. So
yeah,
yeah, all that makes a lot of sense. Peter, thank you so much for taking the time. You
of
guys,
course. Thanks
please
for having me.
definitely go and check out Odyssey.com. Like I said, I've given you my recommendations. The entry level there is the MM100s, which are absolutely fantastic. If you need a closed back, you really don't meaningfully lose performance in these LCD-20s if you want a closed back. Great way to go. If you want to spend a little bit more, the MM500s or what I use, absolutely wonderful. I trust them for mastering applications. And in a similar price range to those, the LCDX with a slightly more accent to the high frequencies instead of the mid-range forwardness. And then also check out the masterclass we just did with the great Andrew Sheps. He's a user of the headphones. He uses the LCD MX4s. He is known for starting all of his mixes in headphones. He's been a big believer in headphone mixing for a long time, and he's done so many platinum selling, Grammy winning records with headphones. And I think he's been doing the best sounding work of his career in recent years. And in recent years, he has switched to Odyssey headphones. He's also come to really enjoy more dynamic and more open sounding records. And he has since stopped trying to win the loudness war as much ever since switching to LCD headphones and his Atmos mixing as well, which is interesting. Can make people appreciate good sound quality as well.
There you
But he
go.
is absolutely a fantastic producer, mixer, engineer, and speaker about this stuff. So definitely check out his masterclass. Sound like you have
Yeah.
something to add there, Peter?
Oh no, I was just gonna say, he's a great guy, a great human. Makes great sound, great music, and we've really enjoyed working with him. So yeah, check out the presentation. It's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, same. Agreed. I had a great conversation with him, another hour-long conversation there, and he went really deep into answering your questions. Just wonderful human being and really insightful and inspiring guy. Also, entered the MixCon Mega giveaway. We are giving away some Odyssey headphones, as well as some speakers and some plugins and some other stuff. Actually, more than $10,000 worth of free gear. So go check that out over at mix-con.com. That's mix-con.com. You can also go and RSVP for all the upcoming mixing masterclasses. We got one coming up next week with Preston Prizzy Reed, who has done a whole bunch of great hip hop and R&B work. The great Nico Bolas coming the week after that. Amazing producer and engineer, done so many records with Neil Young and so many others. Just amazing career on that guy, and a whole bunch more coming up. Workshops like this one. So check it out over at mix-con.com. Thank you again so much, Peter James, for being here with us, and thanks to Odyssey for helping make MixCon happen.
All right, thanks a bunch, Justin. It was great being here, and can't wait till we talk again.
Sweet. Thank you guys for hanging out. This has been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop with Peter from Odyssey. See you next time.
See you later.